Good afternoon and hello everyone. My name is Rich Longo, your host for today's presentation, and I'd like to thank you for joining our database webcast. Our presenter today is Marcus Strauss, product manager at SolarWinds. And Marcus has many years in the IT space in many different roles and has been an integral part of ensuring that IT products address the needs of those that use them day to day. His commitment to product functionality and customer satisfaction is his priority. So a little bit more about Marcus later as he gets into his presentation. But before we get started, let me introduce Flycast Partners. Flycast Partners offers best-in-class implementation services and training in IT service management, IT asset management, IT operations management, IT security, enterprise service management, and workload automation spaces using ITIL best practice. Our professional services team has well over 5,700 professional services engagements, both on-site and remote. And as a company, Flycast Partners has close to 1,300 regular customers throughout Canada and the United States. I encourage you to reach out to us at 844-FLYCAST, that's 844-359-2278, or visit our website. You can chat live with one of our IT experts Monday through Friday during normal business hours from 8:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. They're happy to get you those data sheets and white papers, help you out with remote administration services, any professional services, training, or anything else that you might be looking for. Or you can simply email us at info@flycastpartners.com. During today's presentation, Marcus will be taking your questions live. That's right, live. So please type those questions in the question section provided on the GoToWebinar platform. I will read those off to Marcus and he will answer them for you. I am going to turn control over to Marcus. Marcus, you now have control, sir.
Thank you very much, Rich. And just managing expectation, yes, I will try to answer every question on the screen. I may not be able to, but I will try my very best. So give me 1 second, I will share my screen. And
Okay.
thanks a lot for everyone for, so yes, thanks for the introduction. My name is Marcus Strauss, and as you might figure out by my accent, I'm not from the States. I'm based out of Ireland. And I'm originally from Germany, but that goes way back. And to Rich's point, myself and my team are responsible for at least parts of the database performance monitoring portfolio within SolarWinds. Today, we'll be talking about a particular product, Database Performance Monitor, also called DPM, which was one of the later acquisition from SolarWinds when it comes to the database portfolio. But first off, we'll start off with a little bit of a company overview. Who's SolarWinds, right? And I'm not going to go through and read every part of this. There's a few things I think that are definitely worthwhile calling out, and one of those is the THWAC community, and it's something that as an organization we're very proud of, because it's one thing to have continuous customer interaction through the usual means, but as a lot of us, and most of you on the webinar will know, building a community in this day and age isn't as easy anymore as it used to be. And we've got well over 150,000 registered members throughout the THWAC community. And especially from my perspective, or our perspective, from product directly, this is an invaluable source to be able to connect with our customers, get direct feedback, get input. And it's also fantastic to see how customers help each other on this community. We've also got 499 out of the 500 Fortune 500, still hunting for the last one. We'll get that last one eventually, but right now it's 499 out of the 500. And we've got a very large MSP business, albeit part of this, obviously, if you all followed the news, has certainly recently been split off into the Enable business. And we're, obviously still number one in network management. That's SolarWinds' birthright. And we're, definitely well up in the top 5 in the ITOM space, right? So when we look at our portfolio overall from a SolarWinds perspective, you can definitely see that it's not just one area, right? Terms like observability, come up very often especially when we talk across the breadth of the portfolio, right? I mean, we've got our service management, APM, application performance management, database performance management, obviously. That's the reason why I'm here today. But we also, have infrastructure management, network management, and then on top of that, IT security, right? So really what SolarWinds is doing is providing, the whole tool set for the toolbox, not just, parts and pieces of it. So let's go into what I'm actually here to talk about, database performance monitoring, especially in this context when it comes to open source database, right? Database performance monitoring has been around in one way or another for a very, very long time. But as the market is progressing and more workloads are, either moved into a cloud native setup or, using open source, it also means tools need to adjust, right? And DPM in particular, and that's one of the products I'll be talking about today, is a cloud native SaaS offering, multi-tenanted, specifically geared towards, the cloud native databases, right? Doesn't mean we don't support others, but that's the main purpose and the main focus of DPM. So when we start looking at some of the key differences, between traditional on-prem monitoring and, cloud native monitoring, especially when it comes to kind of things like, database as a service and, things like that, is the ability to be able to quickly start monitoring, right? I mean, you gotta be able to be there as and when the workload appears. It's no longer a case of going through a long process of setting up resourcing and, getting the DBMS installed and getting it spun up, and all of the things that we're familiar with that come from the on-prem space. And believe me, I've been around the industry for, let's just say, longer than I care to admit. Those things no longer really apply in the same to the same extent when we talk about software as a service or database as a service, right? I mean, those workloads are much quicker in terms of deploy. Create and destroy cycles are much shorter. Um, we deal with ephemeral workloads that effectively only live for a very short space of time, right? So the ability to quickly start monitoring these is imperative, right? The ability to see both database and system health, albeit for a lot of people this seems table stakes, but within a database performance monitoring space, very often we're kind of moving in a world where these kind of things become questionable in the sense of, do I want to have an agent that allows me to get system health, or do I not? Agent components, especially on databases, are always somewhat funny in terms of perception, because obviously it touches the database, it sits on the database host machine, and we all know, any DBAs on the call, installing anything on the database host machine is not something that people enjoy, right? But the ability to correlate that data is vitally important to see what's going on in the environment, not only by looking at one part of the puzzle, but by looking at all of the parts of the puzzle. The ability to perform simple comparisons, right? Being able to see change over time, right? This hour versus last hour, today versus yesterday. Same day this month versus last month. All of these things are incredibly important, especially when I can combine this with things like change markers. And I'll get to that when we get to the demo in a bit, but change markers are effectively a way to instrument in the system when something has happened, right? And the ability to compare time ranges based around these things is incredibly important. And also looking at, in-depth detailed query analysis, right? So things like the ability to see a long-running query without any context, or the ability to compare the amount of times the query has been executed. Again, we can add the layer of comparing times, right? I can compare how many times the query was run this hour versus last hour, and so on, right? And again, I'm not going to go through every single one of the bullet points. But you get the idea in terms of what are the important things that we really need to do when we start thinking about monitoring database performance, especially when it comes to kind of fast-moving workloads, right? And I'm putting those two things together in terms of open source, SaaS, fast-moving, because that's where, at least from our perspective, see most of our customers, making use of open source. No, there is on-prem Postgres deployments, but realistically, we're looking at this from a SaaS perspective when it comes to open source, right? So I touched on a lot of these already, right? But what sets DPM apart, really? And really, it's the ability to, again, cross-correlate data between the simple, and I'm calling this simple query performance data, together with the data that comes from either the operating system host machine or by extension from things like Stackdriver or CloudWatch, where we can supplement the query performance data with the environment data that comes from the cloud platform provider, right? Because again, if we're looking at database as a service, um, you know, some of these functionalities that we're used to being able to collect directly from the host machine may or may not be able to do that anymore, right? Because we don't have access to that infrastructure. But we can get that data through the cloud platform provider, right? The ability to really look at it from a 1-second level granularity level, right? And it's something that, it really becomes incredibly important if I need to track changes in the environment and I need to track changes across a particular query and really be able to see, when things started to go south, right? There's several different use cases that, require me to have this level of granularity. And obviously, the ability to give our customers recommendations, right? And these recommendations are not only recommendations on system configurations, i.e. DBMS configurations, but there's also recommendations for the actual query itself, right? So, and again, once we get to the demo, I can show you that in the product itself directly. But things like, how to improve the query that we are seeing in the environment. And that's especially important when we use libraries when we build code, right? Where we don't write the queries directly ourselves anymore. We've got libraries for that, and that's pretty common, right? Um, but it also means there's a certain blind spot when it comes to how well that query was designed, and very often we need a tool to later on go in and see how well that query performs, right? Now, this is kind of like what we're covered today, and this is subject to change in terms of we add new databases all the time, right? But right now we kind of, we support the big ones, both on the open source as well as on the closed source space. So, that's why you see SQL Server and, Azure SQL on there, but also equally Mongo, Postgres, MySQL, obviously, and, Redis. We recently added DocumentDB to that. And again, we continuously add support for new databases. We'll never be able to cover all of them. There's just too many. But what we try to do is, work with our customers to see which ones are the ones that are create the most pain, right? Which ones are the ones that are most mission critical, that our customers are asking us or the market is asking us to provide insight in. And, those are the ones that we generally add. So from a persona perspective, traditional database performance monitoring very often was very much geared towards just the DBA. And that's still the case for DPM today, right? Because in essence, DPM is a database performance monitoring tool. But DPM also extends further out in terms of its user persona, right? We also serve developers, DevOps, SRE, sysadmins, engineers, engineering managers, because each one of those can potentially become, or at least be part of a group of what we generally refer to as accidental DBAs, right? People who inherit the responsibility of the database as part of their job, who may or may not be DBAs the way we think of DBAs today, right? I think of, SRE or DevOps who works on a SaaS platform or something like that. Very often that role inherits the database and the ownership and responsibility over the database, whether they're a DBA or not. Right? Now, how do customers use DPM today, right? And I've kind of touched on some of these things already in terms of being able to perform kind of comparisons. So, if we start on the left and we think about deploying codes, again, one of the key things is the ability to see if something has changed in the environment, right? If I deploy 10 lines of code or 1,000 lines of code or 10,000 lines of code, if there is any sort of query generated as part of that or any query changed, I have to be able to see whether this change made any appreciable difference in the query workload, in the environment, in the performance, and I got to be able to see that, and I got to be able to see that very fast, right? There's nothing worse than making code changes a week before Black Friday, and I won't be able to see that something is going wrong until the day before Black Friday or during Black Friday, right? I got to be able to see those things as and when they happen. Obviously, troubleshooting is still one of the main areas, right? You know, you got to be able to see when the house is on fire, and you got to be able to really quickly understand where the problem is and start deep diving into that, and figuring out what the root cause of that is. And then there's just a general monitoring database health, and there's probably a fourth use case here that is equally as important, and that's continuous performance tuning, effectively, right? Where you don't put out a fire, you just wet the ground to make sure that the fire doesn't come back again, right? So these are the general use cases, effectively, if I'd have to kind of put them into big brackets, right? So with that, I'm kind of done with the slide work, and I'm pretty sure everyone on the call is pretty happy about that. So let me jump into the demo, and then we can come back and do a few more Q&A. And please, like Rich was saying, if you have any questions, put them in, because realistically, nobody wants to listen to me for 30 minutes straight, right? So this is the general web interface of our demo environment, right? So let me pick an environment to start off with, and we can. So this takes a little bit on my connection because I'm also sharing. So when we start looking at the overall summary of the environment, obviously, in reality, this currently is across, like 129 hosts. That's more or less, a little bit too much to be able to really, to be able to pinpoint anything, right? So one of the first things I could do is I could start picking a host or a few hosts, and I can let's pick MySQL, right? Just to narrow this down a little bit, we've got now 6, right? So now I'm in a space where this is my entire MySQL estate, right? Obviously, unfortunately, in the demo environment, this is a relatively small estate. So, all right, let me close my emails here, because apparently right now I'm getting a lot of emails. So what are we doing when we need to figure out a particular problem? Well, there's several ways to do that. One is I can go into what we call the profiler, right? The profiler is where most of our customers spend a lot of their time, and the reason for this is quite simple, right? It allows me to kind of filter and sort and also rank queries in the environment. Again, if I were to do that across the entire environment, it probably wouldn't be very helpful. But if let's say one of the customers reached out and told our support that our web application is getting slow, right? I know that our web application backend runs on MySQL, so I've narrowed this down to the MySQL part of my environment, and now I can start looking at just MySQL, right? I can rank these by total time spent. I can rank these by count, right? So how many times a query has been executed. And I generally, when I talk to customers or anyone else, I use an example of your sign up form, right? You have your customer acquisition, right? And generally that query executed, let's say 2,000 times a minute, which would be fantastic, by the way. You'd get 2,000 signups per minute. That'd be good going. But suddenly it goes up to 20,000 executions in the same time frame. So there's two things. Either you really need to give your marketing team a raise, because your signups went up from 2,000 a minute to 20,000 a minute, or more likely something went wrong and that query gets called more often than it should, right? And the ability to see that, and the ability to go into, and I'm going to use this query guestbook here as an example. Right now, all I see is it was executed 24,000 times within the last hour. But what I can do is I can compare that to the previous hour, right? So if I do a compare time range and, again, for argument's sake, say, the previous hour, I can get a pretty good idea of, actually, this is pretty accurate here. We've got 12,500 times within the hour before and 24,000 times this hour. So it effectively doubled, right? Now, again, this may be okay, it may not, right? But it gives me something to go by. And we also see we have a 90% change over that hour. So that gives me a pretty good idea something went on, right? Now, I could augment that even further and use what we call change markers, which is effectively something that we've borrowed in, from the APM space, right? In the APM space, we're all very familiar with change markers, where we can effectively, as we deploy code, we can tell the system, hey, here's something that's effectively an event, right? Something has changed in the environment. Make a line, visualize that for me, so that later on, if I do need to, I can go back and have a look. And we can, in various different ways, we can see these. Now, I could just drag over here and kind of drill into that timeline, and that's only now a couple of minutes or 20 minutes. I can also just go into the individual query, and I get a lot more details, right? Now, what I'll do here actually is I go back and grab a query that's a little bit more meaningful. So let's remove this and also go back to the hour, so we can actually see something. Now, the change markers, as we wait for this to refresh, the change markers propagate across the entire application, right? So it doesn't matter where I would go, I could see these. And it would tell me exactly, it denotes when something has happened, right? Same here. I can clearly see we had a code deploy here. No, in this case, it was a code deploy. We collect the query family, the digest, and we strip out all of the literals. But we do have the ability to collect samples. Now that's up to customers. Obviously, there's certain restrictions or certain concerns around PII and things like that, and we give customers a lot of ways to make sure that none of that ever leaves their environment and none of that ever gets to us. But for queries where that isn't a concern, or where we can actually collect literals, with the actual query itself, we can get all of the literals that are sent with it. And here we've got one of the recommendations, for example, right? So this is an actual query recommendations where we have effectively an order by, where we have a limit, but we don't have an order by, right? So this could potentially cause slowness in the query itself, right? We could spend another 2 hours here and we probably wouldn't even scratch the surface. So one last thing that I wanted to touch before we kind of have to jump into the Q&A part of this is generally recommendations, right? And I've touched on that earlier on. And especially as we start looking at, open source and, migrating workloads and things like that, having recommendations for both the actual DBMS configuration level as well as the query is absolutely invaluable. The ability to see what changes or what I need to change. Excuse me, I needed to sneeze. What
That's
we need to
okay.
change is absolutely invaluable, right? So I'm going to leave you with this last bit. One of the the most important things from a DPM perspective is the ability to allow customers to compare all of these aspects, whether this is on-prem or in the cloud, or as part of that journey from on-prem to the cloud. And the ability to give customers those recommendations to say, hey, here are things you can improve. Here are things you can improve, both inside a query from the query structure, as well as in your actual deployment, is absolutely invaluable to us and to most of our customers. And with that, I'm going to stop and I'm going to open up for questions.
So as of right now, I've been watching it. We don't have any more questions. However, I do see that we've had quite a few people join in the last several minutes as you've dug into the tool. So with it seems like we have quite a bit of interest. Folks, if you have questions about what Marcus has shown us, by all means, please type your questions in there.
Please.
Yeah, please type those questions in there. If you want to know anything else, type your questions as well. If he can answer it, he's going to answer it for you live. Those of you that, go ahead.
No, I said I will try my very best.
And those of you that are maybe just a little too shy to go ahead and put your question, that's fine too. You can also email us at info@flycastpartners.com. You can call us directly at 844-FLYCAST. That's 844-359-2278. Or chat with our IT experts live during Monday through Friday during normal business hours from 7:30 a.m. to, I'm sorry, 8:30 a.m. to 7:30 p.m. They'll be more than happy to go ahead and answer the questions for you. Folks, if there's any last minute questions, now's your time to ask. Marcus, did you have any parting words?
All I'm going to say is I'm going to leave you with what we have on screen right now. I'm pretty sure some of that will be shared through you guys as well.
It is.
I would encourage you, check it out, reach out to us, and sign up to a trial, play around with it and see what questions you may have, and reach out to us or to Flycast. And, I'm looking forward to seeing you.
Folks, we do have a great team that they're happy to help you out with a trial. They're happy to get you the material you're looking for or demos. So definitely let us know. And we do have a comment here from Clifton. He says it's an amazing tool. He's complimenting the tool. So that's good. That's
Thank
positive.
you very much. And I agree. Obviously, I have to, right?
Yeah.
But thank you.
You're not biased at all, are you, Marcus?
No, not at all. Not one bit.
Not one bit. I didn't think so. Folks, we've appreciated your time today. We want to thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us for today's presentation. I want you to stay safe out there, and please join us for future webinars and reach out to us with questions. As I stated, you can call us, you can email us, or you can chat with us. With that being said, I'm going to wish everyone a safe rest of your week. Please try and make it a good one. And until our next webcast.